Hi guys, just a few words about the consciousness spectrum, which is a central tenet to energy flow coaching. So what's the point of the consciousness spectrum? What does it mean and how do we use it? In terms of what's the point, the thesis is that we exist on a spectrum. And our experience is something that constantly fluctuates, and it fluctuates as we move up and down this spectrum. And at one end of the spectrum, there's a limited sense of self. We are misaligned with our true self, or we are in a low consciousness space. At the other end of the spectrum, there's an expanded sense of self. We are aligned with our true self, and we're calling that high consciousness. And I would suggest that our natural default setting, our blueprint, our factory reset, if you will, is to take us back up to an expanded sense of self and the high consciousness space where we are aligned. And there are all sorts of things that will affect why we fluctuate or why we drop. Sometimes it can be a full stress bucket, sometimes that we just don't really know. But we will fluctuate, and that can be over the course of a day, over the course of a week, over the course of 5 minutes or an hour. But we are going to fluctuate. What we want to be doing, ideally, is be fluctuating more towards the higher end rather than more towards the lower end. When we're at the higher end, we generally just feel better. Life flows. I say because we're aligned, and that true self is a flow of consciousness that is kind of connected to all that is. We just generally feel better. We're in that lower consciousness space. We tend to be more fearful, more agitated. We feel separate. And we think that life directly causes how we feel. Whereas in high consciousness, we know that our sense of reality just emerges from us and through us because we are life. And we can't force ourselves up the spectrum. The idea of it being that our natural default is to gravitate up towards that higher consciousness end suggests that actually when we sit back and do nothing, we will naturally flow back up to that consciousness, that high consciousness space. Usually what happens is that we stay stuck in low consciousness because the habits or patterns or mind loops that we get stuck in, or we're trying to fix ourselves very often, that we get stuck in that low consciousness space. And the importance of it really is that at any given point in time, our perception of ourselves and our perception of life is more a reflection of where we lie on that spectrum than it is a reflection of outside life. So I am arguing that our sense of reality is something that emerges from us, a bit like in the film The Matrix, where the robots attach to the brain and it projects this conception of reality. I'm suggesting that that emerges from within us, so a bit different from the film, the same kind of idea, that our sense of reality is something that emerges through us. And that's something that we are aware of when we're in that high consciousness space, but when we're in the low consciousness space, we tend to think that actually we're victims of circumstance. In high consciousness, we can recognize that reality can be constantly shifting, and it's constantly shifting because it emerges from us and we're fluctuating a little bit. So it's just something that kind of comes through us. But we also know fundamentally that my experience and my experience of life is something that is flowing through me. It's not directly caused by outside life. So it's entirely possible for me to feel okay at any given moment without anything changing out there in life. So I don't frantically try to rush and fix life. When I'm in a low consciousness space, I believe that life directly causes how I feel. I'm a victim of circumstance. So whenever I feel discomfort, which is a lot of the time, I'm frantically trying to think about what needs to change out there in life in order to change how I feel in here. So there's that out there fixation to change how I feel in here. And what we want to be doing, one of the ways we can gently nudge ourselves and our clients up the consciousness spectrum is have them be inward looking. And really it's a process of knowledge. When you're aware that you're existing on a spectrum, and you're aware that actually your perception of self, your perception of life is about where you are on the spectrum more than it is about what's going on in life, it means you can direct your attention to yourself. You can look at what patterns that you are engaging in that might be keeping you locked in a low consciousness space, and you can begin to really take the obstacles out of the way, because that's what we're doing. We're taking obstacles out of the way to allow ourselves to drift back up the spectrum. Okay, hope that makes sense.